G'day, my name's Simon Ellis. I'm a livestock and pasture consultant working through the high rainfall areas of South Australia. Today we're going to look at how to set the feed requirements and the rations for your cattle once they've been put into containment areas over a dry summer. Okay, let's talk about rations. Looking at what the animals need, this column there is the energy they need per day. A dry cow needs 50 units, a late pregnancy cow needs 70, and a lactating cow 100. So you can see that once they move through their reproductive systems, they need dramatically different amounts of feed. So if you're going to be providing all of the feed, you really need to know how much they need. And the second column is protein, and you can see again that the amount of protein they need in the diet roughly doubles as well from a mid-pregnancy to a lactating animal. And youngsters need about the same, even though they're much smaller, because they're growing, they need more energy than you might think, and they also need high protein because they're laying down new muscle and bone and so on. Feed quality varies dramatically. They really aren't created equal. Don't just go on cost. Select the feed that does the job. I'll look at some common feeds, and barley there, you can see 90% dry matter. Most of the feeds that we use commonly are roughly 90% dry matter, which means 10% water. But if you look at, has anyone used silage? Yeah. When you're using silage, you've got to see there that it's only 35% dry matter. So almost 2/3 of silage is water, whereas only 10% of hay is water. So when you're deciding how much to feed, you've got to take that into account. That's a really important thing to know. And even with silage, the range of dry matter can be probably the lowest edge I've seen with silage would be 20% dry matter, and the highest edge would be 50%. So you really do need to know what you're dealing with. So if we add energy in there, you can see that barley has high levels of energy. Oats are medium and variable. Not all oats are as good as that. Lupins, anyone fed lupins? I would say for cattle, crushed lupins are better. For sheep, I think whole lupins are better. Crushing the lupins adds probably 10% to their costs, so it's going to cost a bit more. And with whole lupins, you can feed them on the ground, provided it's not too sandy. But once you crush them, you really have to put them into some sort of a trough. So again, that can be a bit of a balancing act. But yeah, on balance, the research shows that crushing is best for cattle because they haven't got the ability to crush them as finely as sheep have. Good hay, 10.5. But poor quality hay can be absolutely terrible. So when you're buying, or even if you're making hay, you really do need to know what you're dealing with, because the amount of that hay that you need to give animals is going to be way less than that. Protein, again, the protein ranges dramatically. Barley and oats sort of around that 10, 11. Lupins, really good, high level of, it's a grain legume, so it has high levels of protein. Pasture hay, some of the hay I had tested last week was 20% protein, fantastic, just straight up from pasture. But some of the poor stuff that was made last year, 7 or 8% protein, not enough to even keep dry adult animals going. Good silage can be excellent, and lucerne hay. Lucerne hay is a pretty reliable feed as a rule. On balance, for small properties with cattle, it's got to be a really tough year before I'd suggest you get into barley. It's often the best buying. It's sort of cheapest per unit of energy, but it poses some quite serious challenges in terms of introducing animals to it, because they can get grain poisoning if you're not careful. So probably you've got enough other things to think about without getting into barley. Has anyone tried Grape Mark? Look, I put that up there because it is being more widely promoted, and I've got quite a few of my clients now are using it. But they do tend to be on a bigger scale because that mould business, so if you get a load in, you really need to have it finished within about a week. And for smaller properties, that just about puts it out of It's not definitely, but probably. Potatoes, anyone use potatoes? You can actually get seconds potatoes quite cheaply. They are excellent in energy, but very low in proteins. So if you are using second potatoes, then you do need to be sure there aren't many green ones involved, and often there are. So if we've got some good hay, is that about what it's costing, $250 a tonne at the moment? So that's 25 cents a kilo, and if it's 9.5 megajoules as fed, so this is good hay, that's the stuff that was 10 megajoules. Once you allow for the moisture, it's going to be a bit lower in the as fed content. So you divide the cost by the amount of energy in it. So 2.6 cents per unit of energy. If you go through the same process with poor hay, even though it's cheaper, it's $220 a tonne, because it's got so much less energy, it's actually more expensive per unit of energy. So don't buy hay just on price. You need to be sure what you're feeding, and if you've got young animals or lactating animals, protein can be just as important as energy. If they're middle pregnancy animals or dry animals, then having about 8% protein is fine. So it really does depend on what you're trying to feed as to what level of protein is important. If you've got a good hay, a lactating cow is going to need around about 11.5 kilograms of hay per day. So if you've got the good hay and you're feeding them this, roughly 11.5 kilos per day, the cows are going to lose weight, but the calves will gain 1.5 kilos. If you have rubbishy hay, they need 14.2 kilos, so lots more. The cows will lose 1.5 kilos instead of 1 kilo per day, and the calf only gains half a kilo a day. You don't have to be Einstein to work out at today's prices for meat. It's going to be way better to feed the good hay. And in fact, one of the problems you can face is that with that poor hay, they probably actually can't eat enough of it to provide their needs. Keep your animals a bit fat. Don't always have them on the bottom line of the fat. Have a bit of fat up your sleeve, so if something goes wrong, if you can't feed them for a couple of days, or you're crook or something like that, you've got a bit of fat up your sleeve. Don't always have them at the lowest end of what's acceptable.